fair, accurate, to the point. This is Face the State on Montana's news station.
Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us on Face the State. I'm Shannon Newth with KRTV Great Falls and KXLH Helena. Today talking about Suicide Prevention Month, September recognized across the nation as a time to think about suicide, look at statistics around the country and here in Montana. Today I'm joined by two mental health professionals who work with the Center for Mental Health here in Great Falls. That organization also known and established around the state as well. We'll talk more about that later in our program. First, I want to introduce you to Sydney Blair as well as Jessica Boyer. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. And it's a tough topic to talk about. Of course, not just 1 month needs to be dedicated. This needs to be a year-long, everyday effort that we're talking about suicide. And it's no secret that Montana has consistently ranked very high on the list among the United States as far as number of suicides that are committed and attempted every year. I believe we were talking earlier before this program that Montana and Wyoming have been tied for first and second just within the last few years. So this issue very close to home for us here in Montana. So I want to start by reading this quote that you all provided us with here by Kay Redfield. She's with Johns Hopkins University, a professor of psychiatry. This quote here says, "The suffering of the suicidal is private and inexpressible, leaving family members, friends, and colleagues to deal with an almost unfathomable kind of loss as well as guilt. Suicide carries in its aftermath a level of confusion and devastation that, for the most part, is beyond description." So let's first start here. The issue of suicide, there's so much that goes in mentally in the heart for people. And there's a lot that happens prior to suicide. So maybe, Sydney, we'll start with you. For some of the clients that you see and the people that you work with at Center for Mental Health, what are some of those underlying issues that we see that lead up to suicide or depression, or some of the things that can lead up to someone deciding to take their life?
Well, you know, Shannon, not any one person looks the same. We call it the smoking gun, that we're all looking for the smoking gun that tells us that these are the kinds of factors that we're going to see that tells us that this person's at risk for suicide. But the reality is no one person commits suicides for the same reasons or the same factors. It affects all socioeconomic levels, all poverty levels, or socioeconomic classes. It affects all races. So I think that we need to probably establish that first. But what I can say is that if families have or people have gone under duress for a long period of time, if they have untreatable illnesses, if they have previous trauma that's never been worked out, those are all pretty significant risk factors. We also look at recent losses. We look at how the their support system, how they are doing within their job, their identity. You know, if there's a loss of identity because of a loss of a job, or they didn't make it through school, or they're struggling with school. Those are all, you know, difficult milestones to get through in life. So those would be some risk factors that we can take a look at. Previous suicide attempts, or family members with previous suicide attempts, often are good indicators that we should probably look for what's going on underneath. Are there untreatable, is there an untreatable mental illness that we need to address? How the person is just generally getting through life. What are their support systems? Where are they having trouble in life?
And when we talk about that, it seems like, because obviously not every person is going to address this with a friend or a family member or their doctor, you know, which are a lot of times the people that we're saying will see these. So what do we need to do? Jessica, maybe you can go into this more. For family members and friends, it seems like a lot of it is knowing a person, being willing to get involved in somebody's life to really be able to tell, since there are not specific, you know, it's not okay if they have, it's not a specific checklist for every person, for every type of personality. So how do we go about recognizing some of these things in our friends and family members?
Yes, what's interesting is that you stated about seeing a physician. 45% of individuals that die by suicide actually visit a physician within a month of their death. These physicians are trained to see different things like that. And so it's not always noticeable. You know, you have the myths out there, you have statistics, different signs and symptoms that people are supposed to look for, but they're not always there. Another interesting stat is 20% of those who die by suicide visit their primary care provider within 24 hours of that death. And what's interesting is they have the time, that doctor or provider has that opportunity to ask at that time of what's going on.
Right.
So
those statistics too, I don't mean to interrupt you, but when I was reading through those, you provided some information here. Those are statistics that I had not heard before when it comes to going to the primary care provider. I mean, I think, you know, 45%, that's nearly half of all people, seem to have reached out or have had a potential opportunity for intervention within a month, and then even within 24 hours. That's pretty amazing to think about. Okay, there are opportunities to step in.
Correct, correct. And you know, what I find interesting is that people who are thinking, contemplating, or have a plan go on about their life every day. You know, a lot of people are thinking, well, why would they go to their physician to get checked up if they are going to be doing this? And that's one of the things that they can hide very well, is going and living every day, making a trip with a family member or families a month from then, you know, whatever it might be, going to work every single day, putting a smile on their face. So it's definitely something that's growing. I know that you had stated Montana and Wyoming have been trading places. Since 1981, Montana has been number 5 on the list. Since 2011, we are now tied with Wyoming and are number 1 in the nation with Wyoming. So it's growing significantly. You know, even as we speak right now, 13.3 minutes in the nation, somebody commits suicide. So within this program of half an hour, 2 people have committed this act. The state of Montana, if we start talking about teens, 1 every other day, just in the state of Montana, has this happen. So it's definitely growing, and we need to make aware out for people and educate, get it out there. And one of the things that you kind of had tiptoed on was awareness. I think one of the myths that I know Sydney is going to talk about is having people ask. You know, a lot of people are afraid. They're uncomfortable. You know, they may or may not know the answer, but to go and ask somebody who you love, are you thinking about it? Do you have a plan? Is heart-wrenching in itself. But sometimes, you know, that's exactly what they need, is somebody to reach out to them. So,
and I think there's often, and maybe this is a myth we want to address too, that if you ask a question, you are, and this applies to more than suicide, I think, but specifically for our topic, if you ask, then it's putting an idea in someone's head. Is there validity to that? How do we change people's thinking about asking that question?
You know, and absolutely, it's a myth. Most people have thought about suicide for quite some time. They have a plan on the back burner. They're actually storing up or looking for the access. And in some cases, those folks are very relieved to have this plan at the time that they're going to try to complete suicide. And I think that most people can be, it's kind of at the time that they commit suicide, it's kind of an irrational behavior at that moment, at that time, which suggests that we could actually change that at any given time by providing hope, by asking the question, by something changing in their life that gave them that moment of hope or got them through that moment. Because sometimes it's just about getting through that moment or those feelings of that are reoccurring.
Now we talked, you brought up, Jessica, that Montana, again, has been in the top in the nation. This is not something that we want to be, a statistic that we want to be at the top for, consistently high as far as a rate of suicide. So what is it? I mean, we often talk about kind of the pick up your bootstraps type Montana attitude towards it. A lot, it seems like it goes along with being a taboo topic, something that we're either afraid to talk about, we don't want to suggest something, we want to be you know, mentally tough. So this is a big issue. How do we in Montana, or why do you think in Montana we struggle so much, and why are we so consistently high on this list?
You know, I've got some theories about
Okay.
that.
Okay.
You know, I think that we live in a state, mountainous kind of state, where there's vast land, and we have a tendency to be more isolated. I think that's one factor. I think that the rates of alcohol use that's very high in Montana is another factor, and when people are under the influence, the likelihood of them completing an impulsive act that maybe they've been thinking about for a while certainly can come to fruition. I think the other, which you know, you commented on, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that we should be able to handle this ourselves. And the reality is we have more veterans per capita than any other state in the nation. And those veterans aren't the ones that are probably going to ask for help. After all, they are supposed to be, they're supposed to hold up everybody.
Of our country, exactly.
Exactly. So I think those all play into it. Seasonal affective disorders and having harsh winters here, that's another factor that makes us at risk. Because really,
even right now, you know, we're starting to see getting darker and darker, earlier and earlier. Just that lack of light changes the mood sometimes.
You know, the change in the weather recently, where we had that really tough cold spell for a while there and rainy days. You could just see everybody's mood change around you, and in kind of preparation for the season, and so I think those are all pretty significant factors for us in Montana. Interesting that in the last 40 years we've always been in the top 5, and I think when you look at the regional maps of the nation, really it's that belt of Montana all the way down that really has the highest rates of suicide.
Right, because Montana and Wyoming, similar type of
vast
people who live there, as far if we're going to generalize, but I mean the type of people who are tough, hard workers. Montana, Wyoming, the type of landscape similar, you know.
Alaska, same thing, kind of remote areas, not as many people per capita, and kind of the same kind of conditions. Sunlight missing, harsh winters.
I think the means, my theory, I think the means is there as well. You have 3 states that are huge on hunting. Almost every home that you know of has a gun in it. And one of the interesting statistics that I read when we were doing a little bit of research was firearms remain the most common thing used in suicide method, accounting for nearly 51% of all completed suicides. That's huge. That's huge. I mean, anyone has that access. They can go. I mean, you know, we have guns in our house. Our neighbor has guns in their house. My parents have guns in their house.
Right.
It's easily
It's
accessible.
very, very commonplace for Montana. We don't think twice if we see a gun in the back of someone's vehicle here.
Correct.
We're different than a lot of the country in that.
Yeah. So I think with those 3 states being in that top 3, I think, you know, the means, like you said, is definitely there for any age group. Another startling statistic is that the number 2 leading death is suicide for 10-year-old boys, which is just crazy. So it's something that definitely needs to be addressed, and maybe the mentality of Montana and getting educated, and instead of having the good old pull it up by your bootstraps, we need to get out there and ask.
So something that I've heard both of you talking about here is we're talking about the seasons, the remoteness, the access. So this is something that every Montanan is faced with. You know, every Montanan lives in this remote state. Every Montana sees a gun very frequently or owns multiple guns. Every Montanan faces the harsh weather. So how does it go from a change in mood because of the weather to factors that actually impact a risk for suicide?
Well, we know that that seasonal affective disorder is about a change in your body's chemistry, and really not producing enough serotonin or dopamine, and dopamine being the chemical that's going to allow you to feel content.
It regulates wellness, your sense of wellness, is that correct?
Absolutely, whereas the serotonin is around your mood and happiness. And so when there's less sunlight, we actually end up producing less, that we can have that dip if you're subject to that type of disorder. And I think most people don't always recognize that. I think that a lot of factors have changed as well. Social media has changed. people's access to one another, but you know, there, with the social media, there's also been an increase. I think when we talk about our youth and higher suicide rates that are really just scary, we're looking at if they've the issue of bullying, if they've been bullied, and the access to each other on media and the exposure to very embarrassing kinds of issues right out there on Facebook all the time.
Well, and you also bring up the idea of being able to reach the world, but also be very isolated and anonymous in some sense if you want to be, you know, a level of there's some protection so I can say whatever I want and still remain anonymous. That seems like there's been some guards that have been taken down then as far as what people are willing to say to each other that maybe they wouldn't necessarily say face to face. Could be contributing as far as what you're talking about. This is kind of what I'm thinking about as far as what I've seen or experienced just on a personal level on social media, that, you know, it's created this different barrier for, or lack thereof, barrier for how we interact and what we're willing to say to each other.
You know, I think it opened up doors for people that are shyer. Like you said, there's a barrier there that's a natural barrier to allow them to kind of get themselves out there, but it also exposes them to comment as well.
Sure.
And so while there are pros and cons to both, I think we would all agree, it probably has had an impact on the what people can say to you. And when you're struggling with making friends, keeping friends, feeling like you are you belong, you know, those are pretty significant developmental issues for people to resolve in their life and to master. And so when those things are at risk, those kids are at risk at not feeling like they're prepared or capable, and that greatly increases the risk factor for them completing or attempting suicide.
And while we're talking about that, I know we have some information here in regards to college students, and one of these numbers that kind of took me by surprise, if I can find it here, it was about 24,000 college-age students, so we're talking 18 to 24-year-olds, 24,000 suicide attempts annually. Now we're talking about across the United States, not specifically in Montana, but that's a huge number to me. That's, you know, an entire college campus worth of college students. There's a lot going on in that age, that time of life. What do you think some of the reasons are behind why this particular age group sees so many potential attempts?
Well, you know, as you said, Shannon, there is a lot going on. Kids are going away for the first time in less structure in their life into something that's going to be kind of unknown. They have to master. You know, in Montana, only 40% of the kids that enroll in school actually graduate. So that tells you 60% of those folks are dropping out, and that's pretty traumatic on people to not have successfully completed their dreams or completed their vocation, their future, their identity. So really what we're talking about is about 3 different developmental milestones going on at the same time. I'm going to get a job and an identity of what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. That is going to have some kind of significant impact. I'm going to separate from my parents, my community, and my friends, and I need to develop new friends and community. And at the same time, am I going to be able to have a relationship someday and sustain this relationship? And so what I don't think that people really understand is that with all of that going on, that pressure in itself can really trigger other underlying disorders, depression, anxiety, that can diminish your ability to cope from day to day, which makes us more at risk for suicide. And so I think, you know, we were talking earlier, Jessica and I, just in terms of that statistic and how, again, I don't think that we really think about the risk in our college students and what we can do about that. In terms of just when kids go away for college, checking in with them, making sure that that they're connected up. How are they doing in all of those areas of their life and feeling about that? Do they have the resources that they need? And if they're, you know, if they're not going to be able to come home for Christmas, who are they going to spend time with?
Right. And Jessica, that's something you were specifically thinking about and how we go about helping the college age group. It's because, you know, when you go to college, you have a very specific source of connection, and there's a lot of colleges that offer very specific community-based things, but there's times, there's breaks, there's summers, there's after you graduate, you're dropped out of college and into quote-unquote real world where you don't have this structured community ready for you. Those are big adjustments. So some of the things you were saying is plan those out. Don't be afraid to think ahead, plan out how you're going to handle those breaks, those situations.
Correct. Whether you have family in the area, whether you can have the means to be able to, if you're in New York going to college and you're from Montana, to be able to fly home. I know statistics, I don't have the numbers, but it's highest during the holidays because you don't have that support system there, the family and friends to spend time with. So that's definitely a huge factor, is, like Sydney said, making sure that you have that support, making sure that parents and friends are calling, reaching out, and going from there.
So something too that we were talking about before we came on the program here is just the willingness to, as a culture, be more educated and be willing to get involved. And that doesn't have to look like, you know, a lifelong process, but being willing to say, well, here are some resources for you. So, and even now, time has flown by for our program here. We mentioned the statistic earlier that throughout this half hour, there would be 2 suicides around the country. 1 would have already happened at this time. Just a very sobering thought just within our conversation, that statistically that breaks down to 1 suicide that would have already been completed across the country. So as we recognize that, what are some resources that we have to be able to reach out and help people?
You know, we have 4 regional mental health centers, community mental health centers, you know, throughout the state. Those are a great place to start, starting with your general physician and asking just questions like, I've been kind of tired lately, or more anxious, or I'm not sleeping or eating. Those are pretty significant factors to pay attention to, and that medical professionals pay attention to.
And with something, I don't mean to interrupt you, just thinking, a lot of times you have to advocate for yourself, and just even speaking towards the beginning of this program, we talked about within, you know, the statistic that 45% visit a primary care physician within a month of committing suicide. So being willing to, but this is a hard place because you're not going to be in a position, if you are thinking about suicide necessarily, to bring up these things to your doctor. So maybe these are where family and friends can step in to help notice some of these
Absolutely, and just not being afraid to kind of ask. So, you know, I've noticed that you're losing weight, or you're gaining weight, or you're not sleeping, or you've made these statements, or you're giving. You know, I think what the most common perception is that they're giving away their belongings, but there are so many other kinds of potential signs that say that maybe this person's at risk. Because just having that conversation with them and not being afraid to, because the likelihood of them changing their mind or you formulating a plan with them is so much better. And it's just that little piece of hope that's going to change whether they're going to complete or attempt. And I think that's really important to have those conversations. There are organizations for families called NAMI, National Alliance of Mentally Ill. And I know, Shannon, you're going to provide those numbers. There's Mental Health America, and those NAMI and Mental Health America are in every community throughout Montana, or definitely in the larger ones. There are websites for both that you can go on. They're really a tremendous resource. The other resource that I think is really good for family and for individuals is the Department of Health and Human Services on their website has a great resource. It's www.prc.mt.gov, and that has some really wonderful resources for Native American families, for families who have gone through the emergency room with their loved ones, and what do you do afterwards? There are videos, tool kits, so I think that's a good place to start as well. So I think any other resources you can think of, Jess?
I think one of the ones I know that I was recently involved with is the Walk Out of Darkness. They have walks all around the state of Montana, and the money that they raise goes right back into suicide prevention. A lot of people don't realize suicide is preventable. So the money will go towards crisis lines, helping families out that are survivors, or somebody who has attempted, who needs to get back off their feet. So I know that they have them in Helena, Billings, a little bit of everywhere, and you can definitely go and go to their website and see where that's at to advocate for suicide. So,
and specifically, the Center for Mental Health has a number of locations around central and north central Montana. I can talk about some of the resources specifically that the center provides and the locations for those.
We have 20 different offices in 13 different counties. And so if you just get on our website, or call 761-2100. We can direct you to our office locations where you can begin to kind of meet with somebody. We typically, if you come in during 8 and 5, we will see you if you're in crisis and have some kind of assessment and maybe link you up with some resources and give you referrals if nothing else. And I think that's just taking that first step is going to be really important. After hours, there's a number of hotlines. There's the 1-800-273-TALK. There's there are warm lines with peers who have gone through their own moments of mental illness or depression or anxiety that man warm lines. And we can provide those numbers later for everyone. And so they've been there, they've done that, and they can talk about the recovery as well and how they did it. And I think that's a great way for people to maybe take that first step as well.
And something that we've been part of here in Great Falls specifically is through the Center for Mental Health, a grant that was provided here is the YCD, or the Youth Crisis Diversion. Just have to bring that up because I've had the pleasure of being part of that program so far, is that is helping provide the after hours availability to a crisis worker for kids and families specifically. So a neat program that hopefully will spread across the state, we hope. Yeah.
Absolutely. we've had since January, we've had over 103 kids call. I'm sure that there's more since then. That was the last data that I looked at. 70 of those kids went through the ER between the hours of noon and 5 p.m. So their families are taking them in between, in the middle of the day because they're in crisis and they need help. And really, part of the grant was about, we would rather people came into to the professionals. There's nothing wrong with them accessing care through the ER, but what they're going to do is evaluate whether they need to go to a higher level of care outside of the community or if they could be treated right here in the community. And it's really our goal. And there's a coalition around early childhood to keep kids and kids in the community with their families. We're going to be looking at opening a crisis stabilization facility for youth so that we can avoid sending them out of the community and just provide that that plan and that stabilization, that short term, with their families involved as well.
So a beam of hope, a step forward in helping Montana get over, hopefully, that statistic. Not that get over is the correct word, and we don't want any state to be high on any type of list, but helping to conquer this continual issue. And we really do want to leave with a message of hope for people, that resources are available, that there are ways you can intervene, there are ways that suicide is indeed preventable.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you both so much for joining us today. Again, Sydney Blair, Jessica Boyer with Center for Mental Health here in Great Falls. Again, the center located around the state, resources around the state for you as well. And we did mention that we have a number of variety, whether you want telephone, whether you want website, different things like that. We have those resources. I'll compile a list and send them out to our affiliates all across Montana to help provide you with those resources. Again, leaving you with a message of hope that suicide is preventable and that September isn't the only time to be thinking about that. So again, thank you for joining us here on Face the State as we talk about Suicide Prevention Month. I'm Shannon Newth. Have a great Sunday.
Thanks for watching Face the State. This has been a presentation of Montana's news station. Fair, accurate, to the point.
How would you like to win a Can-Am ATV just in time for hunting season? Big Bear